Welcome to the Cloud Accounting Podcast, a show for accountants using technology to make their jobs more strategic and impactful. I'm Blake Oliver.
And I'm David Leary.
Joining us today for a special bonus episode of the podcast is Ed Kless, Senior Director at Sage Accountants Solutions, Senior Fellow at the VeriSage Institute, and co-host of the popular radio talk show, The Soul of Enterprise, which can be heard live on Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific on Voice America. Ed, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, guys.
So, Ed, you describe yourself as a business iconoclast. What does that mean to you?
I forget where I came up with the iconoclast language. At first, I had corporate iconoclast, and then I changed it, I think, within the last 6 months or a year to business iconoclast. And, an iconoclast is a breaker of icons, right? A breaker of the things that are sometimes held sacred. And I like to think of myself as someone who seeks those out in business and tries to go about creating new ways of thinking. Because I think, unfortunately, for a lot of businesses, there's far too much groupthink around certain things. It's not really just business. It's just about everything. The status quo disturbs me, and I like to disturb it back.
I'm picturing you, Ed, in the temple, just storming through and throwing down all of the idols onto the ground and smashing them.
Yes, absolutely. The idols of the timesheet, ROI, those efficiency, Lean Six Sigma, all of those. Those are the things I'm taking out.
It's funny that it describes it that way, because in my head, I actually made a note. I was like, I want to ask Ed, like, how you became a nonconformist, right? And because I think for me, like, I can look at a very specific thing that happened. It was almost like a George Costanza type moment, right? When George becomes the anti-George. Like, is this something you were just born with, or did you, like, some event in your career kind of open your eyes to where you're like, hey, I'm going to start thinking differently about stuff. I'm going to attack the world differently.
I don't know. There was definitely not a moment that I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe if I gave it a little bit more thought, I could, but no. And I don't think I was always this way. I think I was much more of a conformist through, say, high school, even into college to a certain extent. And then, things just started to strike me as wrong. I guess, meeting Ron Baker, who's the co-host on The Soul of Enterprise with me, that clearly had a piece of it. But it was even before then. My mentor was a guy by the name of Howard Hansen, who it was at Great Plains, right? Before it was even Microsoft, long time ago. And he is still my greatest business mentor. And he's really the one who I think influenced me on thinking about things differently about stuff. So there wasn't a moment, but it was more of a growth based on people that I had met and a self-transformation over time.
Got it. Is this how has this navigated with your career? Right? Has it affected your career goals? You ever managers are like, that Ed's an out of control guy. I can't control him. like how is being this nonconformist, affected you career wise?
Okay. So it's an interesting question, because it started at Sage in a very weird way. Like let me quick back up a second and say I owned a business that was reselling and implementing accounting software for 15 years or so, and I sold my interest in that business in December of 2001. And then for about 18 months, I did some various other projects. I did some work for Microsoft because they had acquired Great Plains, and I was mostly a Great Plains partner at the time. So I did some consulting work from them. Then I did some consulting work for Sage. And then I was hired, this is ironically, by Taylor McDonald, right? Who is now at Sage Intacct, of course, right? But I was hired by him. In fact, I am at Sage 15 years and 9 days. So because it was
wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So you would think, like, how does a corporate iconoclast or a business iconoclast last for 15 years, right? That's your question. And it's because I worked for Taylor, and Taylor had, for a number of years, he just protected me. He was like my rabbi, right? He would just make sure that the stuff that I was doing was well received by people, but also made people think. And he gave me the ability to just go do that. And he encouraged me to think in that capacity. He wanted someone who was disturbing the status quo, just one person. And then he got let go. Long story behind that, but he got let go. And then I think the powers that be, who I've taken over from, or who took over in Taylor's role and all that, were just like, well, we don't know about this Ed guy, but the partners and accountants seem to really like him. And we're not sure what would happen if we fired him. So
got
it. Like, if he's this crazy and he still works for us, what would happen if he didn't work for us? Right.
It's that fear of not embracing your conformity.
Exactly. They'd be like, "Oh my God, what do you do?" That's probably just what's built up in my head. But really, kudos to Taylor for allowing me to do that. And one of the great stories that I've often told about this is I have strategy in my title, and the reason why I do is because there was a year back in the day at Sage when it was one of these corporate, hey, we didn't make our numbers, so therefore there's only cost of living adjustments across the board. Nobody's getting any merit pay increases. So I said, fine, Taylor, I understand that. That's how corporations sometimes work. That's the way things are going to be. But I just say there's one thing that you can do for me, and that is to add the word "and strategy" to the end of my title. And he's like, okay, I can make that happen. I'm like, great. I said, because here's why. Because when you have strategy in your title, it means that you get paid to think, and you get paid to tell other people what you think. They don't have to like what you think. They don't have to do what you think. But you get to tell them what you think, because that's what having strategy in your title means. And so he's like, okay. And that's the kind of relationship that we had always had. Now, this is hand to God, true story. Every subsequent boss that I have had at Sage, I have had that exact conversation with. And so when they came in and said, hey, you're reporting to me, Ed, I said, okay, great. There's one thing that you need to know about me, and that is this strategy in my title and what that means.
It's kind of like your 007 license, right? Like you once you had it, yep. Like you just inform the next manager, hey, I have this title already. You can't take it away. And this is what I'm going to go do.
Yep. And they're like, oh, okay.
So, Ed, you are not only outspoken about your opinions in business, but also politics. And in getting to know you over the last few years, I've had the privilege of friending you on Facebook. And I want to thank you for diversifying my Facebook feed. I come from somewhat of a liberal bubble, and I have conservative family, but I'm kind of only used to hearing those two points of view. And you, as a libertarian, provide a different point of view that I very much appreciate. And I found out that in doing some research for this, that you in 2010 and 2012 ran for the Texas State Senate as a libertarian. And in 2013, you sought the Libertarian Party of Texas nomination for lieutenant governor. So I wanted to ask, was there anything in particular that inspired you to become a libertarian and run for political office?
It was also not, there was no, road to Damascus moment for me on that either. That was really more of a transformation over time. Yes, I did run for both Texas State Senate, and very short-lived, by the way, for lieutenant governor. I dipped my toe in the water and then quickly got out of that for a number of different reasons. But
did you have yard signs? Did you get to that point?
For state Senate, yes, and still do. I still have them. I was smart enough to create the yard signs without a year on them. Right. So I can reuse them in the future. Yeah. So if I ever decide to run again, but that was a real joy to be able to do that. To first of all, be able to represent the Libertarian Party, especially in Texas, was fun. But it was also great to go to these. They don't do debates. They do what are called candidate forums. Right. And for me to go and talk with all of these politicians who are genuinely seeking the office, because one of the great things about being a libertarian is like you have zero chance of winning, right? And I have like zero desire to actually serve in the Texas Senate, right? So, can you imagine how awful that must be? What a lousy job, right? So it would just be horrible to sit there for days on end debating whether or not so-and-so should be the ice cream parlor of Texas or whatever, right? So because of that, I was able to say stuff and get people to think. So it's exactly what I do in business, which is to try to get people to think about things differently. A lot of the conversations that I had during these candidate forums, when something like this, they would ask a question about, I don't know, well, what are we going to do about the water supply, right? And I said, I object to the premise of your question. Right, because the premise of your question implies that government needs to do something, and I don't think that the government is a very good solution in this particular case. Right, and that it would be better. Here's what we'll do: let's let the price system determine the price of water. And if there's a need for water, if the price of water starts going up, you know what will happen? Somebody will say, you know, I should build a lake. I should build a reservoir, and because I'm going to make a lot of money doing it.
That's a great point that you bring up, Ed, which is that we assume, I think, that government, if there's a problem, that government should do something. It's just a given, right? But you're saying, actually, maybe government shouldn't do something. Maybe it doesn't always have to be the solution.
Yeah. You know, don't do.
And probably most of the time.
Yeah, well, don't just do something. Stand there. That's the mantra of the libertarian government, right? And it's not because, you know, and you might have seen this as a post, I think, that was earlier this week, maybe in the last week. I said, I hope Donald, the head of the EPA, this guy Pruitt, is getting ousted for whatever reason. And you know, the big thing is did he or didn't he get involved in this controversy? And the Democrats now scream at the Republicans and back and forth. And you know, my point was, and I think this is what you're getting at, well, my Facebook post is like, I hope Donald Trump takes the opportunity to get rid of the EPA, right? And people are like, get rid of the EPA? Why would you do that? Like, well, because the EPA does a lousy job at what it's supposed to do. That's why. Right. I mean, remember the thing in Utah, was it, where they opened up this cavern and flooded, you know, put sulfur into the water supply. Right. Who says that government policy is any better? And I think that's what people mistake, that like, why should we Michael Munger, who's been on my show, has a great way of describing this. He says governments are a lot like unicorns. Right. And people say, well, unicorns, what do you mean? It's like, well, imagine I had a transit system that is run on unicorn power, because, as you know, unicorns are strong and they can carry a lot of weight. The great thing about unicorns, too, is that they poop strawberries, and their flatulence reduces global warming. And you might say, well, Ed, this is a great plan, except for one thing: unicorns don't exist. And I said, well, of course they exist. If you and I close our eyes and say, what is a unicorn? We are both going to conjure up a white horse with a horn and probably rainbows around it. So of course they're real, because we can both imagine what they are. He said, but they don't exist in reality. I said, okay, fine. Neither does what you're proposing in terms of a government solution. Right? We idealize what we think government should be able to do. But it's not real. It can't do the things we ascribe it to. It can't poop, you know, strawberry flavored ice cream and its flatulence get rid of CO2.
So I think taking you away from a unicorn for a second and like making this more real, right? Because I think there's a good example that's very teachable that you explained really well, and I think that's your opinion on. So when the hurricanes happened and people were raising the prices of bottled water. And I love the lesson, that, because I think you cover economics, you cover government policy, all in this one thing about the bottles of water. So for those, and then the price gouging, that's what I was looking for. So I'd love for you to explain your position on that.
Yeah. You know, and it's a great tie-in, David, to the unicorn story. Is like, it would be great if government could control prices in such a way that it would not affect negatively what it actually wants to affect the other way. So let's take water is one thing, but let's take maybe a slightly easier example for people to understand, and that would be the price of hotel rooms that are just outside the hurricane cone of destruction, right? So that when people are fleeing and on the road, they're pulling into a motel, right? Why shouldn't I believe that the people who are running that motel should increase their price as much as they can, because say I have, my wife and kids are with me, and we might be here for a while. So what I'll do is if you are coerced by government fiat to keep the price of your room at $59, let's say, or $159, and so I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to be here a while. I'm going to give me 2 rooms, because that way we can spread out a little bit. My wife and I can still have a separate room. My kids can have a separate room. That's great. Well, that means that someone coming behind me with, say, an elderly mother or whatever is not going to get that room. So therefore, I think that it would be better, just from a human standpoint, if prices were able to fluctuate with that demand for the marketplace, and they end up charging me, say, $400 a room or $375, and I'm like, I'm just going to take the one room with the double beds, and my wife and I and the kids will be in it, and that's great. So now there's another room that is potentially available to someone else coming after me. And you say, well, what about poor people? Well, okay, but this rolls. It's not trickle down. I hate that term, but this means that, okay, fine, but that will still mean that there are rooms at some point closer to the point of impact of the hurricane at a cheaper price for the people who can't afford the $375 a night.
The model, right? This is where it gets tricky for people, is like, how could it possibly be better, even if you don't have a lot of money, if there is price gouging? But it actually causes more efficient allocation of resources.
Correct. Yep.
In the end. And you kind of have to do the math to get to that point, unfortunately. But I think the example of the hotel room or bottled water is it like, or actually a great example is surge pricing for Uber and Lyft, right? Like people hate the surge pricing, but they put up with it. Well, my example, when I tell people why surge pricing is good, I say, imagine that your wife is about to give birth and you need to get to the hospital, but your car isn't working. So you go on Uber. Well, even in a rainstorm in New York City, you can get an Uber thanks to surge pricing, where you can't get a taxi, right? So you're going to pay $100 to get to the hospital or more, but you'd be happy to pay that, right? And if it wasn't for that, then the people who really, really need it desperately wouldn't be able to get it.
I have a friend who's alive because of that. Like, he had a heart attack on the side of a road, and his wife had the prescience to call Uber and not an ambulance.
Wow. Yeah, I imagine it would come faster in a lot of places.
So in theory, everybody listening to this is, or most people listening to this are probably bookkeepers, accountants. Maybe they have their own firms of some type. Maybe there's some sort of advisory type roles. So like thinking about like for surge pricing and demand-based pricing. So if I have an accounting firm, if I use some sort of demand-based pricing, that would help me. It would help me alleviate my load when it gets to those tax deadlines, because people would probably file a little bit earlier knowing they were going to pay a ton more to come to my office on that last day.
Absolutely. I mean, you're crazy to not have surge-based pricing around tax season, right? I mean, that's completely insane to me to not have that.
And I feel like, Ed, well, what's your experience? Most firms don't have it, right? I've rarely talked to a firm where they change their price as maybe they have, a PETA client price.
Did you have it, Blake?
But, well, I don't even think we had it at HPC. There was we did have surge pricing when it came to like 1099s or whatnot. Like if you didn't get us your information by this date, we would double the price, and that really worked. But we hadn't actually done it for the entire firm. And I mean, it could be very reasonable, right? If you get it to us by this date, it's this price, this date, this price, this date, this price. I feel like most of the problems in accounting firms around busy season are because they aren't pricing properly.
I would totally agree with that. I mean, it's incredible to me. I mean, because let's face it, if you wanted to, you can delay probably the majority of tax returns by just saying, hey, if you want the cheapest price, we put you on extension.
Yeah, no problem.
And your taxes are not going to be filed until, what is it, October 15th? Is that the 2nd, or is it September? I always forget, because I know there's one that's corporate and one of them is personal, right? So yeah. Yeah, so the cheapest price is we just throw you on an extension. Done. Next. And we're not going to do your taxes during this, this crazy period between January and April 15th. And then I think the whole tax season thing goes completely away.
Yeah. Or you're at least not compressing it all in 3 months and you're spreading it out over 9 months. Right. And by then you've got another cycle. So really you can even out this workload just by, I mean, you don't even have to do crazy things like, well, crazy to some people, like ditch your timesheets. You just have to actually price appropriately.
Yes, but well, and yes, that's true. I would say, just in defense of getting rid of timesheets, because that's I'm a big believer in doing that. The problem is that in keeping your timesheets, you will then think that all of the hours have equal value, and they don't.
I'm just wondering, I keep trying to figure this out in my head. Like, what is the barrier? What is the, maybe you have this answer, Ed. What is the one thing that causes accountants to be unable to drop the timesheets? The illusion of control. So meaning that I see the timesheets coming in and I feel like, oh, now I can see what people are working on. Yep. It's the illusion of control. It's not real control because you don't have it. It's the illusion. Well, it really, and it's a self-imposed delusion, in my opinion, because I spent 1 year as a manager in a large public accounting firm, and I had to review my staff's timesheets, and I was kind of amazed at how every month they would come in on budget for a client where if they were actually giving me their real hours, then there would have been much more variation from month to month. This was for our monthly outsourced accounting clients. And then actually I had one senior accountant straight up tell me that she had a secret spreadsheet that she kept with her real hours. And then her, she didn't report to me, and I think she felt comfortable that I wouldn't report her. I mean, what's anyone to do about it, right? But she had a secret time budget, and so she knew that she had so many hours every week that she had to hit for all these clients, and so she would portion them out. I know. Well, look, this is not surprising. You guys probably have seen me do this. I call it the nuclear option. And that is when I'm standing before a group of professionals, whether they're accountants, lawyers, doesn't matter. And I say, anyone who's ever filled out a timesheet, raise your hand. And of course, every hand goes up because it's presupposed. And then I say, and how many of you have ever not put down exactly what happened on the timesheet? Right? Keep your hands up. And nobody puts their hands down. And because, by the way, it's also, they sometimes lower it too. So they actually work 8, but they put 6. Right. So it's not that people are padding it to go over all the time. It's they're actually doing it under. My guess is that in the long run, it's actually under more than anything. Right. And the reason is because you don't want your boss to think you're an idiot. Right. So you're like, OK, well, I know it took me 8 hours, but I'm only going to put 6 because otherwise I'm going to get reamed for it. Right. So they lie up and down. So here's the thing. And look, this happens every single week. Right. Every timesheet is a lie. There's at least one lie on every timesheet. My guess would be. I will completely admit that when filling out my timesheet, most of it was crap because I don't have the discipline to fill out my timesheet as I go every day, every hour. I'm at the end of the day I'm like, what did I do today? Have you ever had that feeling? Right. Like you go home and you're like, what did I do today? Try filling out a timesheet then.
And I think it ripples just, obviously there's a whole podcast people could listen to that's out there. I think Ed has one that's just about how unethical these timesheets are, right? And the death of the billable hour. But I think it evolves like even past timesheets. I think you look at net promoter scores, right? And how those are kind of in theory, but they're always coached. You go to work on your car and at the end, the cashier's taking your money, and then she asks you to fill out the net promoter, and then you put a 7. She's like, they're going to get in trouble if you don't put an 8 or higher. Will you put an 8? I'm like, no, I'm not going to put an 8. Like but again, like this goes at nonconformist. Like unless I've tweeted or recommended it, I actually have done the recommendation. You don't get a 9 or 10. I give everybody a 7. Like that's it. But it's kind of that same thing as like people will just, because it's there and it's a form, you'll just fill it out to appease the person who wants the data. Yeah. There's a blog post I did a long time ago on this, and Ron and I recently just uncovered it and talked about it again. But this whole idea of what you can measure, you can manage, right? Or it's sometimes said the inverse: what you can't measure, you can't manage. Right. First of all, it's attributed to Peter Drucker, and he never said it. Never, ever said it.
Okay, I've searched it. You cannot find any attribution. Now, Peter Drucker did say something similar in that he said was what you measure, you will get.
That's actually far more meaningful.
So, which is but the stories that both of you guys just told, right? So, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get the number of hours that were budgeted. That's what I'm going to get, right? And I'm going to get what people are encouraged to do on the Net Promoter Score because they know that it's going to be gamed. So we're going to get it. So there you go. What you measure, you will get. That's what you're going to get. Because guess what? We are human beings, and we're scams. We're scams.
The worst scam we do is the one we do on ourselves.
Yep. Yeah. Well, lying to yourself is the greatest lie. Right.
and that's what we're doing as managers of accountants when we look at these timesheets and we think they're real. We're lying to ourselves.
Well, because before I had the nuclear option, one of the things that I would say to people, if you were in a management or leadership position in a firm, I said, is if I took your utilization reports away, would you still know who your good people are? And everybody says, yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay. And because then here's the thing is the timesheet is used as a weapon, and it's used as a weapon either for or against them. Right. Yeah. So because look, I can say you billed too many hours or too few hours and you're still screwed.
Yeah. It's like the annual performance review. Thank God I only had to do one of those.
Corporate. That is kabuki theater. That's what I like to call it.
Well, Ed, I would love to talk about this all day with you, and I hope to run into you again at a conference soon. For our listeners who are interested in learning more about your philosophy, what you're up to, the Soul of Enterprise, what's the best place for them to track you down online?
I would love for them to visit thesoulofenterprise.com and give a listen to one or more of our radio shows out there. But just if you want to connect with me via Twitter, it's just at Ed Kless, EDKLESS as in Sam. I'm the only Ed Kless in the world. Yes, I do look at that every so often.
Wow, that's amazing.
I cannot recommend their podcast. It's amazing.
You mean you cannot recommend it enough?
Freudian slip.
Enough. Yes, sorry.
Oh, and I just found this out. I didn't realize this, but we can listen to The Soul of Enterprise live on Fridays at 1 p.m. Pacific on Voice America, right?
Yes, you can. And it was just thesoulofenterprise.com/live at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes, you can listen to it live.
David, where can people get in touch with you?
Easiest way is on Twitter, just at David Leary. And obviously this is a bonus episode, but usually we're talking about what's going on in the accounting world and cloud accounting technology. So if you see a story, you think Blake and I should discuss it, shoot it over.
And you can connect with me at Blake T. Oliver. Thanks everyone for listening. Ed, thank you so much for your time. David, I'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, everybody. I'd love for you guys just to talk about your little musical backgrounds, because I think, Ed, I've seen you play a grand piano at a bar and sing. And as you know, Blake has is very musical background. So I would love to understand. Blake said he thinks he saw you sing in a session you gave.
So I have a minor in musical theater, which explains a lot. And the other concentrations that I had were in business administration and information systems, but ask me which one I use on a more regular basis, and it's clearly the musical theater. Just how to get up in front of an audience, how to pause, how to walk with a purpose instead of just walking back and forth on stage, pacing, making everybody seasick, especially if you're on a camera. Just some of those things have been so influential in my career. So that's the background for it. I view everything as a performance. I've got a reputation for, especially in the spring and summer, for wearing a seersucker suit, and it's a costume, right? And that's what's my LinkedIn picture. Everything is I have that seersucker jacket on anyway. So I view everything as a performance. And there's just been a couple of times when the spirit has moved me, so to speak. And if I think of something and it's connected in my mind, and I'm like, oh, that reminds me of a song. So there, so that's the experience behind it.
So before we go, I've got one more question for you. Really, it's two. What is your favorite musical and what is your least favorite musical?
All right. So this is really interesting. My still favorite all-time musical by a tiny little smidge is West Side Story. And I had, for a couple of different reasons. One, I think it was completely transformative in its day, introducing the concept of jazz into the Broadway theater. The whole notion of a story that was advanced by the music, not just added to. The plot advances in the story of the music, and the genius of Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. But I will say that a very close second is now Hamilton, because it's done the same thing.
I've yet to see that, of course, but maybe when, they seem to be implementing surge pricing quite well.
Oh, yes, they are. They're doing a great job of it. In fact, I just had the opportunity to see it on Broadway last week on my vacation with my wife and kids, and we got tickets in the 6th row. Long story, and it's absolutely amazing. And it was the best non-original cast production on Broadway I've ever seen. And for those of you who are into theater might understand that an original cast is usually so much better, mostly because they've usually worked it for 2 or 3 years before they've gotten to Broadway. So it's down. And then when new cast members take over, they're only doing it with 4 to 6 weeks of rehearsal afterwards. Right. So they're never quite as good because they don't have it as nailed, and a lot of times they change the music to fit the voices of the original star. But what that does is it speaks to the strength of the show. It's so unbelievably good. So as far as my least favorite one, I would have to think on that. I am moved by a lot of music, so it can be a really crappy musical, and I'll try to find something that I like.
Perfect.
All right, we'll let you go on that one. Thanks again, Ed.